Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another question and answer session with Jeremy. Hello, Jeremy. And before we
Good
want
evening,
to
Wes.
good evening. Just before we get started, real quick, I want to mention I am going to have the class. Some questions have come in on it 9, 10, 11 of October and the Dordogne, France. I will update my website early August. My web person is gone till then. So more information coming, and again, email me and I can give follow-up information if people are interested. So thanks for the questions and the interest. All right, to the questions. Jeremy, I'm ready. I think I'm ready. I don't know. We'll see if I'm ready.
All right. Question one is from Michael De Silva, and it's about superheroes. He asks, is it possible to have individualist heroes? And is that why we so worship superheroes? And there are a couple follow-ups on this as well. One is, if we have a collective fascination with superheroes, it seems like they contradict the 10,000 hours Malcolm Gladwell thing. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think the first part of that is the superhero thing is fascinating because I rarely watch movies, and I don't think I've made it through an entire superhero movie. I've tried a couple of times because people say, oh, you got to see this one or that one. But notice it almost invariably comes down to one or two or three people like punching somebody. It's like, okay, we've got these intergalactic, super intelligent, super strong, super powerful, but somehow it just comes down to punching people. And I think this is the visual incarnation of individualism, and in general, and American individualism, and particularly because it combines our love of violence with the notion that any problem is tackled by an individual head on, right? Like this, it's you just express yourself and you go and you do it. And sometimes there is teamwork. So I know there are the teamworky ones, but it usually still focuses on, this collection of individuals rather than like, oh, let's have something where, we have a group that coordinates itself and you never get close to the person, and all this. It's why is it always so face to face? Part of it is drama, right? It makes it dramatic, but why do we love the drama of the face to face hero as opposed to the sort of faceless power of the markets or something like this? So I think the superheroes are highly reflective of this tradition, by the way, which goes all the way back to ancient Greece. So again, this is not an exclusively American ideal. It's just that we've sort of taken it and gone crazy with it, gone mad, taken it to its, I think, ultimate extreme. As to the 10,000 hours one, I think it's I would read that kind of the other way around. I see what the people are saying is like, oh, superheroes just arrive being super, which I think is generally true. Some of them have development stories, but I think generally they're just sort of some magic. Something happens. They get bitten by a spider, right? Doesn't Spider-Man get bitten by a spider, and then that's the development story. But the thing with what Gladwell does is he provides the narrative of the individual, like, oh, any individual can do this. All individuals have the capacity to be superheroes if they put the 10,000 hours in. And so what Gladwell does is it licenses our belief in the great individual is made by themselves. The great individual is happens. It actually runs counter to the genius argument, which is why I like Mozart example that he uses so well. And maybe somewhat to the superhero argument when you think about it, because clearly some people are just born with skills that they have to develop, right? But they have a predilection, they have skills, but we can work all our lives. The average person can work all their lives, and they're just never going to run a 4.240, or they're never going to be able to play the piano the way Yu Zhi Wang does. It's just that all these other professional pianists who've dedicated their lives to this art of playing the piano stare at her and just go, yeah, well, forget that, right? Like she's just, superlative, and other superlative pianists like her. So, those sorts of elements, we don't really like that. We like the idea that we can make ourselves great because that's part of the individual narrative. So I don't know if that answers the question, but the superhero mostly fulfills it, I would say, because it's always an individual acting, having outside shape on the universe. The individual, Batman saves the day, Superman saves the day, Spider-Man saves the day, not for themselves, but for everybody.
Right.
So
do you think superheroes are sort of an escapist entertainment for us? Like imagining, well, what if we didn't have to do these 10,000 hours? What if we just could show up like aristocrats and just be super because we were born?
Yeah, I think that it is escapist in that sense that oh, it'd be great to just be capable. Wouldn't that be great? Like, but it also is the familiar of, oh, we just need the individual, right? If we just get the right person or the couple of right people, then everything will be great, right? So it's the continual desire for the strongman leader, right?
Okay.
Oh, if we just get the right leader, then that individual will make everything great, right? It's this continuous fantasy of the individual is going to fix everything, whether superhero or political leader or what have you.
Yeah, and Michael's fourth question there is, are we just trying to justify our collective failures by beseeching superheroes?
Yeah, I think you could read it that way, but I think it's not. I think it's the collective failure is to understand the collective, right? Like it's we have problems that can only be addressed by coordinated collective action because we live in this vast, complex, interconnected world, right? Like there's just clearly any significant problem you look at, you go, yeah, there's nothing you can do. It's very frustrating when you live in a narrative of the individual, to be told I mean, you're not told this. Like we always ask eighth graders, like, what would you do to solve global warming? Like, like we do this to eighth graders. You're like, why are we asking eighth graders? We don't know what the hell to do, right? It's going to take. It's not the eighth grader who's going to save the day, but we like to then, to Silva's point, I think it is like nice to imagine that, oh, our sense that we can't affect things gets translated into, well, if we were superheroes, if we had superpowers, if I were a dictator, if I were Superman, then I could make everything great.
Yeah, and relying on an idea, like maybe this eighth grader is going to come up with a new idea that we hadn't thought of, and that individual idea will be the one.
Yeah, and because we love because we can't, it's part of our mental incapacity to escape the individualistic narrative. It's either I as an individual need to do that, or some other individual needs to do that, or if it seems so completely overwhelming, then a super individual needs to do that. Right? We just need a super genius. We need that genius eighth grade girl who's going to have the fusion power. She's going to make fusion power work, and then we're all going to be something great, good things.
And this superhero question made me think of the noir detective hero in film, which has similarities to superheroes because they're solitary and they're fighting for justice, but they seem like maybe they're applying the 10,000 hours, like they're working hard, they're up in the middle of the night smoking cigarettes. And it felt like maybe that's a counter to the superhero, where the superheroes might be an escape, like imagining we don't have to do the 10,000 hours, and the noir hero is on the ground doing it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting comparison there. But yeah, the noir heroes are so classic, right? You can't as a contrast, the big detective novels in France, which were influenced by the noir movement, by the way, was Maigret, and he's married, and a lot of the scenes take place with him chatting with with his wife, and he has a community and he has friends, and it's this, right? Like it's hard to imagine a like married, happily settled down, loving relationship, good home life noir hero. Maybe there is one. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I'm not a specialist in the field, of course, but it's always these hard-bitten, solitary, like you're out there on your own, and that's how you do it. Which is just, again, it's just silly, but we love it. But again, that's the narrative that we seem to have to embrace. The amazing individual.
Right on. Okay, well, question 2 is, it's about what are we missing with community in our own self-interest? So how are we missing the idea that involving ourselves in community might be the best strategy for accomplishing our individualistic goals?
Yeah, whoever articulated that, thank you very much. That's well put, better put than I was stating it. So great, thank you for clarifying my own thoughts. Yes, this is the problem. I would say, if there's a problem with the individual's narrative, it obscures the fact that much of what we want to accomplish and need to accomplish as individuals are best achieved through community. Feeding yourself is much easier to do in a communal setting than an individual setting. Indeed, it's one of the drivers of civilization in all sorts of different forms, is because it's like, if you're just you trying to feed yourself, this generally doesn't work very well. So you want to form a community to feed yourself because eating is good, and so forth. It's just about everything we want to do. We are better and more successful and more fulfilled at it if we rely on and are integrated within a community to do that. Having said that, of course, community does have limits and rules, and it does, so it is a give and take relationship. But when you start forgetting that the community is both necessary and helpful and good for the individual, that's when you're just lost. And that's what I think has happened with the American individualism. It's been pushed to this level where it actually, like I said last time, quoting from various authors, we're pushed to the point where we deny the value of better to be suckled by wolves than to inherit a farm.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, just that is such an extreme statement, because it's clearly not better to be suckled by wolves than it is to inherit a farm, because you don't learn language. Language is good. We like to speak. We like to express ourselves. Music is good. All these things that we enjoy are taken from us. And when you emphasize the individual too much, it often is just at the cost of individual health. So it's that's the problem.
Yeah. And this lecture seemed to touch some buttons emotionally for people. And a couple people were pretty upset in the questions. And they were basically suggesting that rugged individualism it's actually an evolution compared with previous societies, and that previous societies were holding back this kind of quality that was waiting to get out. One person said that they kind of pushed back at your idea that we don't have identity in the culture, and that family is a strong identity, in this case in Kentucky, I believe, saying that you work hard because of your family, your mother, this kind of thing. And what are your thoughts about the idea that rugged individualism, American individualism, this extreme individualism is actually not a problem, it's actually an evolution?
Well, I think it's correct in the sense that it is an evolution, and in part, technology has made it more possible than ever to express individual. Like, we have this capacity that we've never had before, because you're just liberated from so much of the necessity of cooperating with your neighbors, right, with the people around you, for just survival. And so technology and actual social evolution has made it possible, oddly, for the individual to be more expressive, more liberated, more rugged individualism than ever before. So yeah, I would say in some ways that's true. The question is it a good evolution? I mean, fascism was an evolution of earlier governmental and social forms. I wouldn't say it was a real positive one. And rugged individualism, the mythology of it, and the notion of the liberated individual sort of making their way in the world, has never been less true. This is the weird thing about it. We inherit, and certainly in the developed world, we inherit so much history, capacity, advantage, like electricity. Like, I didn't invent it. I didn't put it in the walls. I didn't do anything. And I get electricity, which is this labor-saving thing that lets me do, which liberates me as an individual to do all kinds of things that if I had to gather firewood every day or dig coal every day to just to have heat, yeah, it would be a problem. It would be, I would be very much less free, right? It would be, liberation would be more restricted just by my material conditions. So oddly, we have a communally provided material conditions for individual freedom that we've never had before. And this has allowed the expression of quote unquote rugged individualism, which I think you could think of as very soft individualism, because you're not very rugged actually in this case. But the problem is not that an individual expression isn't the problem. It's when it becomes, like I said, in the American context, when it decides to attack the very conditions of its existence. And it says, oh, those things that frame it and make it possible for me to be an individual I'm going to assault, because I read those as limiting me rather than actually making this possible, making my ability to attack it as actually possible. And so it's a framing structure. And I think that's where it goes wrong, is when it misses that when it tries to pretend that it doesn't have that base anymore.
I see. And another kind of upset question, suppose we take your debatable premise that individualism is detached from the past and future. What's wrong with that? Why should I, as an individual, care about the past or future? I was dead before my existence, and I will be dead after. The only real past and future is my past and future.
Yeah, that's a beautifully and very clear stated American individualistic position. So again, thank you for clarifying that so well. That's beautiful. The problem, well, quote unquote problem, the difficulty is traditionally in traditional societies, again, most societies in the history of the world, this is how people structured their sense of identity, is by placing themselves within the context of a personal past and with the notion of being connected to a future. And it seems to be, all the evidence is, many of the social ills which people complain about and which we experience are a pretty clear direct byproduct of people feeling just in a way sociopathically isolated, right? Like when people take guns and, shoot up schools or do crazy things to try and get a sense of purpose and place and to be recognized and have a sense of self and identity, this suggests something is wrong, right? Like this suggests that it is a problem. And again, speaking of uniquely American things, lots of societies have guns, lots of societies have murders. There's like one or two exceptions, but we're the only society that has school shootings as a regular phenomenon. This happens, you could probably work it out statistically how often we're going to have someone walk in and shoot up a school. A student walk in and shoot up a school, and it's clearly because young people at a certain rate are so mentally ill. There's nothing else to say for this. That it seems like a good idea to them, and so when you look at these kinds of social difficulties, then you go, wow, what's going on and what's causing this? Now, you can argue, look, whatever we gain in individualism, which is an open question, what is it we gain from this theory of individualism, is worth that price, which is fair, right? There's always a price. You could say, okay, it's worth it to have it. But I just think we're very unreflexive about the degree to which American individualism drives our cultural narratives and shapes the way we view the world. And hence that makes us as individuals, but perhaps more importantly for my subject of the lecture, communally, it makes it very difficult for people to understand the U.S. and how it operates in the world. So we're often mistaken and misunderstood because of the degree to which we are embedded in this individualistic narrative.
So it's a practical problem, not a theoretical problem. Not having a past or future is, you can see the results in mental illness. You can, and that's the reason. It's not that theoretically there's anything wrong with the idea of individualism. It's just that we can see how it's working, and sometimes it may have gone too far.
Yeah, and it's extremist. It's going as far as I'd say the United States is pushing it. It makes us very confused. It makes us misunderstand the world, and it does have very practical apparently, social ills, essentially, where you just go, oh, this is creating social ills. Perhaps we should, reflect on it. And also to the question on Kentucky family. And someone said, oh, you work hard for your family. And I do want to say, by the way, that there's no more oppressive structure in the history of man than the family, right? So I do not want to say, oh, the family is the greatest thing ever, blah, blah, right? It is problematic. Families have been struggling. But what the U.S. calls sort of family and working hard for your family and all this is no association to what most countries are talking about. This is they would not recognize what we have called family values as family values. And it is variable through the states, right? So you can look at statistics and the South does is somewhat, but only slightly more family oriented. But I'm trying some of the example. One of my Indian friends said the weird thing to him about the United States is we all have these big houses that are empty, And in India, we all have small houses that are full of people. And he said, if we went to India today, we could travel around from relative to relative basically forever, because everyone, when we showed up, would be so happy to see us. And it would be Pranav from who went to study in America and his American friend Wes, and they would put us up and we could stay there and they would feed us and it would be great. And we could stay there for months. And then if we wanted to leave, we would go to another relative. He says, we could tour India for years doing this and everybody would be overjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, what would happen if you walked into somebody you knew's house in America and said, hey, we're here to stay. This is my buddy Prana. We're going to stay for a couple of months. He's my buddy from India. And I'm like, right. No, they would, this is not a, right. You might be my friend. You might be my family, but that we don't do this. Right. We don't just go, yeah, welcome, stay. You can sleep in the garage for a couple of months. It's all going to be great. We're so happy you're here. Never leave. Right.
Yeah.
And, that's, so this, even what we call family values, and it also tends to be very focused on the nuclear family, wife, kids, husband, kids, maybe a little bit parents. But also the parents thing is very weak here. Again, compared to Chinese society or other societies, the median age in the United States when children leave home is 19. So half of the children in the United States leave home before they're 19, half leave 19 or over, right? So we leave early. In Croatia, Italy, people are, I think the average age, again, median average is tricky. It's hard to find good statistics on this, but it's clearly much later. But I think it's like 27 is the European average. And then a lot of countries are like 30. And people go, oh, well, it's because they're poor and they don't have money and da-da-da. And it's like, or everybody's just happy with the situation, right? Why would you want your son or daughter to leave if you have space for them? And if they're going to make money, why not contribute to the household and have them around rather than move away? And often when they move away, it's, next door. So,
gotcha.
So I don't want to say that there's no variation in the United States, because there is, but it's compared to globally, we're very, very weak on family values, like shockingly weak. But also liberated from the family. So again, there's that,
right. Yeah. The next question is from a European person called Lovisa, and they're interested in how did American individualism shape American politics? So the question goes, could you talk more about how American individualism has shaped American politics and maybe vice versa? As a European, I find it interesting, but really hard to understand.
Yeah, this is a great question, and one I'm doing the series to try to unravel this question, like how do we come to grips with the influence of these things that we just take for granted. One, I think, is the go and make something of yourself, and this is a growing trend in American history. It's been there nascent, but that individualism has increased. If you look at something like school funding, we tend to want to pay for college for students who are excellent, right? If you're really good, if you're the superhero, then you should get a scholarship. If you're some sort of minority group, you should get a scholarship, but school should just not be free, right? It should be earned. It should be worked for. The individual should be out there making something of themselves. The notion, maybe what this has been commented on by many people in the United States, if you're fired from your job, you're a bad person. In a lot of places in Europe, France, Italy, these sorts of countries, if you get fired from your job, your employer is a bad person. And the government has a problem. It's not your problem. It's the government's problem and your employer's problem, not your problem. Right. And so it's a completely different view on where responsibility for things lie. And so when you think the individual should be responsible for most everything, then you have programs and policies and arguments and outlooks like this. When you think the individual is part of a larger whole and the larger whole needs to be taken care of, you tend to lean that way. So yeah, unemployment is a great example. Another great example is our insurance system in the United States, where you're responsible for your insurance. Like everybody is responsible for themselves.
Mhm.
as opposed to most of the rest of the world, where there tends to be some sort of communal, most of the rest of the developed world, where there tends to be some sort of communal undertaking to make sure people get insurance.
Mhm.
Um, oh, how else does this affect? Oh, the whole tax policy thing, where taxes are taken, how they're taken, how we view that is, it tends to be highly variable, but on average, for instance, in France, again, because I'm here, so I know more about it. I think it's half people pay no income tax, something like that. It's close to half of all households pay no income tax. They pay social tax. Everybody pays your social tax, so it's very
Yeah.
flat in that sense. But most people don't make enough because they just say, "Oh." Whereas in the United States, everybody almost, I mean, you might get the money back, or there's other things, but it's a more of a tax at the individual level
Mhm.
rather than at the communal level. So, where taxes go. So we tend to have a strong federal system where a lot of countries, taxes will be more distributed. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot of ways that this plays out, but probably it's where the responsibility for things lie, where your societies think they lie.
So American individualism strongly affects American politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Every single day in every way. It's extraordinary. And again, the example I used, I think I may have mentioned this, but is both the hard right, you visited a French election, everyone was worried about the right wing taking over, but one of their big policies, a heavy investment in school, heavy increase in pensions for old age people, large investments in the medical system for everybody. Right, because the purpose of government is to take care of the population. And in the United States, the conservatives are like, no, do none of that, because the values in the Americans are much more towards the individual. And even the quote unquote liberal policies tend to be highly selective to the right individuals, right?
Mhm.
Like even Obamacare is everybody has their own insurance, right?
Mhm.
That's the liberal answer to insurance, Obamacare, right? And you're like, that's a very American answer. It's a very American answer.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Next question is about Stoicism. In your previous lecture, you were suggesting that the Stoics encouraged their students to go into public service almost exclusively, and uh, someone pushed back on that and said, kind of a very specific example, that Lucilius said it's perfectly okay to pursue philosophy instead of public service. And so the question is, are you picking and choosing parts of Stoicism that kind of fit your narrative? And yeah, that's it.
No, it's a good question, but no, this is absolutely the core of Stoicism. Notice that Lucilius has to say it's okay to study philosophy,
Yeah.
right? Like this is it's okay, because while politics is super important and public service, you're actually doing a public service by doing philosophy. That's Lucilius's argument.
Yeah.
You don't have to directly be in the Senate, or be one of the equestrians, or be one of the governors of a province. That's what you should be doing. That's the best thing to do. But it is okay to study philosophy, and that it is a public service.
Mhm.
So it is, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of gray area in philosophy, and generally, I'm happy to say, oh yeah, you never, different times. But with Stoicism, it's perfectly easy. It's not even they were. Yeah, they believed in public service as what you were supposed to be about. How you did it, what was the best way to do it, this is what they argued about within Stoicism. But again, they spent, maybe a millennia, but hundreds of years attacking the Epicureans because they would not commit to public service. That they just said this is the most ridiculous. They just said it wasn't a philosophy. They said it's just a waste of time because of that. That was their critique for, again, centuries. This was not like one Stoic. Wasn't Seneca going, "Oh, I don't like the Epicureans." It's just like forever.
Yeah. Okay. Stephanie Roberts asked a question about Hegel. It's sort of a clarifying question. Did Hegel have an idea that you need to be a part of society, or else you'll become depressed? Is that part of Hegel?
I was trying to think of a specific passage from Hegel that would encapsulate this idea, and I couldn't come up with one. But let me put it this way: it is certainly Hegel's concern, and the philosophy of history and the history of philosophy, which is helpful to have two books almost with the same title, and they're both incomprehensible, so it's great. Is in some ways simply is nothing else but a study of how time periods form communal self-understanding. I mean, this Hegel was obsessed with this. His lectures, by the way, many of his books are actually lectures that were transcribed by students. So one reason they're troublesome is, that's not the best way to do this. They were his lecture notes that students collated and collected, and they were later sort of formed into books. So I throw rocks at Hegel, but that's a little unfair because that's what he was doing. But in those works, he is very much obsessed with how societies form a sense of themselves and how individuals reflect on and are involved in that. So I would say yes. Again, I couldn't find off the top of my head, I couldn't think of one passage, but if you read it, I don't know, 50, 75 pages in either of those works, it's not subtle. You'll be like, oh yeah, this is the subject. It's not the only thing he's doing, but it's a big thing he's doing, is trying to understand zeitgeist, where they come from, how they evolve into new zeitgeists, how different time periods are different. It's one of Hegel's big breakthroughs, is to sort of realize that different times had different senses of themselves. Which it's an idea we take for granted now. Like, we're just like, oh yeah, of course, Egyptians didn't think like Americans. But that was new. That was a newish thought. So yeah, I would say Hegel would agree with that.
Okay. All right. Next question is about Cormac McCarthy and David Foster Wallace. These seem to be writers who you don't particularly jibe with. But the question is, do you feel like they're great American writers, even if you don't love sitting down with coffee and reading them every day?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, and a way to frame that, yeah. So greatness is about what I like. Absolutely. Clearly, they've been hugely influential and in different ways. David Foster Wallace, very different, I would say, than Cormac McCarthy. But they've both been hugely influential, and they're both cited, regularly as some of the most significant writers. So I would say yes, absolutely. And I like reading David Foster Wallace more than Cormac McCarthy, but for sure. But I would say both of them are probably going to hold up over time. And again, I know sounds like I was being critical of Cormac McCarthy, and I just don't like his writing. I mean, it's just sort of a nightmarish to me. But what he's done, and this is the greatness of his writing, is he has captured not the truth of America, but the imagined reality that people care, or enough people carry it, that he's considered a great writer, right? So that is powerful, and his writing is strange and powerful. So he couldn't deliver that message that he has without having that powerful, entrancing style of writing. So yeah, I have no hesitation. Yeah, and again, I feel like they'll hold up over time. Particularly Cormac McCarthy, because he's easy to read. So it turns out that helps over time. The really challenging authors tend to fade a bit. Often.
Yeah, and you feel like they're reflective of the American culture in some way.
Yes. Yeah, and I think they both did a good job of capturing some of the internal life that people feel in the United States. Yeah.
All right, and this is our final question. It's basically asking for a prescription for America in the future. So it says, how do you think American culture could accept their ignorances from the past, as you've described, and have a more connected culture from where we are now?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, my theory, which is of course going to be totally wrong, so that's fine, is that we've run the American individual experiment as far as it can go. I was trying to actually just abstractly go, how would you make a more nihilistic society from an individual standpoint? And I mean, you could make it more concrete in reality, but I don't think this is what people want. People talk about how polarized our politics is, and like everybody's like, oh, this is polarized. And I'm like, yeah, it's very tribal, that's a word people keep using, tribal. I'm like, right, it's tribal because people want a tribe, right? Like, this is, if current politics teaches us anything, is that people are desperate desperate to have a tribe to belong to. And that desperation, I think, is perhaps itself a signal that we're done with that experiment of the radical individual, that we're realizing that it is the limits of it have been reached, and that we need to do something else. We've kind of played this out. And so again, on the left and the right, I don't think this is, I think both parties have the same concept. It's like we're trying to build an identity that people can feel they belong to. And that is not what politics has always been, which is interesting, right? Like policies, no one cares about policy. I don't think we don't do in-depth policy discussions. We don't do it's just like, no, we want our team to win and we want their team to lose, because I like my team and I feel good if my team wins, and I feel like I belong if my team wins, and I feel like I don't belong if my team loses, as opposed to we're all in this project together and we're going to disagree about the best way to run the project, but that's fine, because you don't always get your way and it's really not that big of a deal. And this is, I would say, not the sense that people have now. And so how to deal with it, I have no idea. But I do think the zeitgeist, to the extent that it's moving the direction you see, is very much an attempt. It's a social many millions of people cumulatively together, communally going, no, we want something else. What we've been doing has not been working. We want something else. And part of that is we want to belong to something that we can believe in and agree about and invest in, that's bigger than ourselves. And
so you don't see 3 easy first steps to fixing it. Do you feel like we need to reach catastrophe, like, live under an authoritarian regime for 70 years or something like that? Is that the kind of...
what's weird is that might work, right? Like 70 years of authoritarian regime, the first thing they would do is write a history, because it's what authoritarian regimes always do. And so they would immediately implant a totally fictional, but nonetheless, there you go. It would fix us in the past. This is why authoritarian regimes tend to be obsessed with the past, not universally, but generally they are very invested in creating a history that justifies their existence and gives people a place to be, right? It's make America great again, right? Notice this is writing history. This is a historical claim. America was great. Things got less good. Now we want to make it great again. Join the great American historical arc. This is your chance, right? So this sort of patterning might actually make people happy for a while, right? It tends to fall apart, of course. That's always the problem. And then the future, right? Hitler was very invested in 1,000-year Reich. Why? Why would you start pitching 1,000-year Reich? It's the same thing. It's now you have a future. Right? I've given you a past, the Aryan nation, the conquering people, the worker, and now I'm going to give you a future 1,000-year Reich. Right? Like, here we go. Now you're in the flow. Now you've got all of the pieces so that you can feel like you belong and you have a membership and you have identity. And so it is dangerous when people feel a complete lack of identity. That's when troubling things really begin to happen. So we'll see. But lack of identity, a sense of a lack of identity, has historically led to bad things. Because people get desperate.
In episode 4, we will expect you to come up with the 3 easy solutions.
The 3 easy solutions. And part of this, I think, is not unfortunately, but just necessarily, we are enmeshed in history. And again, this is the thing we hate about the American individualist. It's like, oh, what can I do to control this? The notion that we're subject to historical forces. Oh my God, we hate this idea. I mean, it's so obviously true. I mean, there's all these forces at work that have nothing to do with us, that influence our lives, right? I mean, ask the people in Ukraine. They didn't want to know no part of this. They're sitting there in their garden one day and tanks roll through. This is not them, right? They didn't invite the tanks in. And, it's just they're there, right? Historical forces, geopolitical forces that are much greater than any individual continue to operate on us. But our desire to have this all be within our control and to be subject to individual agency, and particularly our agency, is so powerful that we we just hate that idea. That's like, oh well, you live in a zeitgeist, forces are happening, things happen. It's like it's madness. By the way, I was thinking of the complete contrast of this is in some ways Taoism, which just says, oh yeah, shit happens, that's fine, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it, right? We're like, no, if you don't worry about it, then you gotta be in there, like pitching. You gotta be in there. You could be president. It's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to be president. No,
Yeah.
I'm not. Apparently, I'm not old enough to be president, right? Like, we got to wait until you're like, what, 77?
The accepting of the collective.
Yeah. So even when we're being surrounded by it, influenced by it, and it's pressing down on us, we want to say, what can I do to change the collective? And it's like, well, sometimes the force of the collective is just overwhelms the individual. You can kind of surf, you can move around within it, but may not be within your purview to influence it in any way. Which is, we hate that message. We really do. It's even hard when I articulate it. It sounds, that sounds like so weak and so quitty and so like, not, but it's like, yeah. But it's just so obviously true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Wes. And also thank you to all the listeners who asked questions. They were great this week.
Yeah, and thank you. Yeah, and some of those were probably waffly sounding answers, but that's because you guys are answering such good questions. I don't know, so we'll see. Yeah, and thanks a lot, Jeremy. I appreciate it. And we'll post this very soon. And the next episode, of course, I think each episode is great, but this one is called Nihilistic Materialism. So I think it's a follow-on to the American Individualism. I think hopefully people will like that one. So thanks again. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.